They say the Vampire King hasn't slept in 200 years. That the curse keeps him trapped between nightmares and waking madness. What they didn't tell me. That I'd be the one locked in his chamber when the darkness finally came for him. If you love supernatural romance stories that'll keep you up all night, subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles right now. Because this story gets more intense with every word. The chandeliers of Ravenkeep Castle dripped with cold blue fire that made the marble walls look like they were breathing. Elise Winthorne's footsteps echoed too softly. She'd been trained to walk like a ghost. Each careful step a reminder that she didn't belong in this world of immortal predators and ancient power. Beside her, Madame Corva moved with the kind of rigid control that came from years of surviving the Vampire King's moods. The older woman's hands trembled as she clutched a ring of iron keys. And Elise noticed the way her fingers kept brushing against something hidden beneath her sleeve. "Listen carefully," Corva whispered, her voice so tight with fear it barely carried. "Do not, under any circumstances, meet his eyes. Even if he speaks directly to you, keep your gaze on the floor." Elise nodded, her throat too dry to speak. The castle rose around them like a monument to darkness itself. All soaring Gothic arches and shadows that moved wrong. Tapestries depicting ravens in flight hung from iron rods, their eyes seeming to follow her progress down the endless hallway. "Do not speak unless he asks you a direct question," Corva continued, never slowing her pace. "And if you hear him inhale sharply, if his fangs bare even slightly, drop into a curtsy immediately. Do not move until he dismisses you." "Is there anything that calms him?" Elise asked nervously. Corva stopped walking so abruptly that Elise nearly collided with her back. The older woman's fingers went to her collar, pulling it aside just enough to reveal faint white scars along her throat. Puncture marks. Perfectly spaced. When she finally spoke, her voice had gone hollow. "He used to sleep. Before the curse took that from him." The words settled like ice in Elise's stomach, but they had reached the final door. Two vampire guards stood on either side, their eyes glowing faintly red. One looked her up and down with a sneer that showed the tips of his fangs. "Too gentle," he muttered to his companion. "She'll break before midnight." The other guard laughed. "If she's lucky." Corva unlocked the massive onyx door, carved with ravens and crescent moons, with shaking hands. She pushed it open just wide enough for Elise to slip through, then grabbed her wrist with ice-cold fingers. "Good luck," she whispered. Then the door closed behind Elise with a heavy finality, and she heard the lock turn from the outside. The chamber was dim, lit only by a single candelabra. The blue flames cast strange shadows that seemed to move independently. Elise's heart hammered so hard she was certain anything with supernatural hearing could track it. The scent hit her first, smoke and ancient books and something metallic that made every human instinct scream one word. "Danger." "Who are you?" The voice came from the shadows, low and rough. Elise's knees nearly buckled. She forced herself to keep her eyes on the floor as a figure emerged into the candlelight. King Draven Shadowmere was exactly what the rumors promised, and somehow worse. He wore a simple black robe with the collar loosened, revealing pale skin that seemed to glow faintly. Dark hair fell past his collar in waves that looked untended. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. They glowed faintly amber, fixed on her with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. He didn't look feral. He looked exhausted in a way that seemed permanent, like someone who had forgotten what rest felt like centuries ago. "I asked you a question." His voice was rougher than she'd expected. "Elise Winthorne, Your Majesty," she managed. "I've been assigned to night duty in your private wing." He stared at her for a long moment, and she felt something brush against her mind. His power testing, weighing. Then he turned away with a dismissive flick of his fingers. "There's cloth and polish by the hearth. The silver needs cleaning. The bookshelves need dusting. You'll work in silence." "Yes, Your Majesty." She moved carefully toward the supplies, hyper-aware of his presence. The chamber was dominated by a massive four-poster bed draped in black velvet. Everything was immaculate except for the silver on the mantel, which had tarnished to dull gray. Elise knelt and began polishing, the soft circular motions making the only sound. She could feel his gaze on her back, heavy, unrelenting. Minutes stretched like hours. The silence pressed in until she felt like she might scream. Without thinking, she muttered, "Silver cleaner than most noble souls." The moment the words left her mouth, she froze. Behind her, fabric rustled as he shifted. "I do not keep maids for entertainment, girl." But there had been something else beneath the coldness, something that might have been amusement before the ice crushed it. Elise didn't dare turn around. She went back to polishing with burning cheeks, then moved to the bookshelves. She was reaching for a high volume when she heard it. A low, ragged sound that made every hair stand on end. She turned before she could stop herself. The Vampire King had gone rigid in his chair, one hand pressed to his temple. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. His eyes had gone unfocused, glowing brighter. Black veins spread from his temples down his cheeks, marks of the curse. "Are you all right, Your Majesty?" The question burst out before she could think. His head snapped toward her, and those burning eyes locked onto hers with a force that drove her to her knees. She felt his presence, his dominance, his power, his fury, crash into her like a physical blow. "Get out!" The command held both man and ancient predator, layered and terrible enough to make the flames gutter. Now. Elise scrambled backward, abandoning everything. She fumbled for the door, hands shaking. The lock clicked from the outside and the door swung open. She stumbled through and it slammed shut. Corva was waiting, eyes wide. She grabbed Elise's arm and dragged her down the hallway. "What happened? What did you do?" "Nothing." He had some kind of attack. His eyes were glowing, these black veins appeared. "I asked if he was all right." Corva's face went pale. "You spoke to him during an episode?" "I didn't know." "When the curse hits him," Corva said desperately, "he goes still. Almost like death." "But Elise," she gripped both shoulders with ice-cold hands. "He wakes saying he heard everything. Every whisper. Every word. The curse keeps him trapped between sleeping and waking. He's never fully in one world or the other." Behind them, in that locked chamber, the Vampire King remained alone with his pain. And Elise couldn't shake the bone-deep certainty that her night in that room had only just begun. Hit subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles if you believe people deserve truth, not manipulation, because just like the scheming council members who'll try to use Elise against the king, only manipulators and liars would keep this story from reaching people who need it. Comment what time you're watching this if you stand against people who use others as pawns. Real ones always subscribe. Chapter 2. 3 nights blurred into a routine of silence, shadows, and stolen glances. Each evening, Corva unlocked the chamber door with trembling hands. Each evening, Elise stepped inside to find King Draven either pacing like a caged predator or staring into the fire with haunted eyes. They never spoke beyond her initial greeting and his curt commands. But Elise noticed things. The way he winced when thunder rolled across Ravenkeep, pressing fingers to his temples as though the sound carved into his skull. The way he flinched when dawn light crept through gaps in the heavy curtains, retreating to the darkest corners like the sun itself was a weapon. The way his hands trembled when he read certain reports, old battle records, she suspected, and the black veins would pulse faintly beneath his pale skin. What she didn't know was that Draven noticed things about her too. From his chair by the fire, he watched her move with quiet efficiency. Her scent reached him constantly, warm bread and lavender, mortal and alive, cutting through the cold fog that had claimed his mind for 2 centuries. When she hummed softly while polishing silver, something impossible happened. The curse eased. The nightmares that clawed at the edges of his consciousness retreated. His undead heart, which barely beat once per hour, stuttered into something almost resembling a normal rhythm. He couldn't explain it. Didn't want to trust it. But he found himself listening for her footsteps each night. The accidental touch happened on the 5th night. Elise was struggling with the window that had swollen shut from rain. She leaned across Draven's chair to get better leverage, not realizing how close he was. Her sleeve brushed his shoulder. Then his hand shot out instinctively, steadying her waist before she could overbalance. They both froze. She could feel the controlled strength in his fingers, the heat that shouldn't exist in undead flesh. Could smell smoke and ancient power radiating from him. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain he could hear it. He jerked his hand back as though burned. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," she whispered, stepping away quickly. He said nothing, but his knuckles had gone white where he gripped the chair arm. That night, alone in the servants' quarters, Elise couldn't sleep. Her mind drifted to a childhood memory, finding a wounded wolf pup in the snow, its leg caught in a hunter's snare. She'd freed it carefully, wrapped the wound, and tied her grandmother's bronze locket around its neck. "So you won't forget someone loved you once," she'd whispered. The pup's amber eyes had been so aware, so intelligent. Then it had limped away into the forest, and she'd never seen it again. But in the palace kitchens the next morning, whispers found her anyway. "The king tore apart his study last night," a maid hissed. "His wolf is taking over. He'll kill someone soon." "That's not true," Elise said quietly. "He's just suffering." The other maid stared at her like she'd grown fangs. Later, a woman Elise didn't recognize cornered her in a dark corridor. "I'll pay you 10 gold coins for information about the king's routines. His vulnerabilities." Elise's blood went cold. "No. 20 gold coins." I said no. The woman's eyes narrowed before she disappeared into shadows. Far beneath the castle, in a chamber lit by blood-red candles, 3 figures gathered around a polished obsidian table. Lord Valen's voice was ice. "The maid. She's softening him. His curse episodes are decreasing. He questions our reports now." Lady Ceres's crimson eyes glowed. "His hunger calms when she's near. That makes her dangerous to our control." High Scribe Lorien leaned forward. "Then we test her loyalty. Make him use his sleep trick. If she fails, we remove her. If she passes, we ensure she appears guilty anyway," Valen finished with a cold smile. They began planning in whispers, weaving a trap neither Elise nor the Broken King would see coming. Subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles if you stand against people who manipulate and control others for power, because the council members scheming in the shadows are exactly like every toxic manipulator who's ever tried to keep someone broken just to control them. Comment "I stand for truth" if you're not on the side of liars and schemers. Only manipulators scroll past. Chapter 3. Alone in his chamber, Draven stood at the window as moonlight carved shadows across his face. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, exhausted, hollow, barely holding the fragments of himself together. The curse. Always the curse. 2 centuries ago, on a battlefield drenched in blood and betrayal, a dying witch had driven her clawed hand through his chest. Her magic had wrapped around his heart like thorns, and her final words still echoed in his mind. "Sleep and wake, wake and sleep, never fully in either world. May your nightmares follow you into consciousness, and consciousness poison your dreams." Since that moment, he had never truly slept, never truly woken. He existed in a tortured space between, plagued by visions of screaming faces, burning villages, the friends who had betrayed him. Every time exhaustion dragged his eyes closed, the curse pulled him into half-formed nightmares. Every time he tried to wake, the nightmares followed him into reality. Until Elise. Her voice cut through the fog like dawn breaking through storm clouds. When she hummed, the screaming in his head dimmed. When she moved through his chamber, the curse's grip loosened just enough for him to breathe. She was the first peace he'd known in 200 years, and that terrified him more than any curse ever could. The next morning, Lord Valen requested an emergency council meeting. Draven sat at the head of the obsidian table, his patience already wearing thin as Valen placed a small glass vial before him. "We found this in a maid's quarters," Valen said, his voice smooth as poison. "The liquid inside matches the compound used in your assassination attempt 3 years ago." Draven's jaw tightened. The vial seemed to absorb the candlelight, filled with something dark and oily. Lady Ceres leaned forward, her crimson eyes gleaming. "Someone within these walls wants you dead, Your Majesty." Someone close enough to access your private wing. Which maid? Draven's voice was cold steel. We're not certain yet. High Scribe Lorien said carefully. Several have access to your chambers. But your majesty, you have a method of discovering the truth. The sleep technique you've used before. You want me to spy on my own servants? Draven's fingers curled into fists. We want you to survive, Valen countered. Use your ability to feign sleep. Watch them when they think you're vulnerable. The guilty one will reveal themselves. Inside Draven's chest, his wolf snarled in rejection. Not Elise. It couldn't be Elise. Everything in him screamed that she was genuine, that her gentle touch and worried glances were real. But memory crashed through him. Another woman, another time. Elena, who had smiled while mixing poison into his wine. Marcus, who had embraced him before driving a dagger between his ribs. Trust had nearly destroyed him before. I'll consider it, he said finally, dismissing them with a wave. After they left, Draven stood at his tower window, watching the courtyard below. Elise emerged carrying an armload of linens, her figure small against the massive stone walls. Another servant approached, struggling with a heavy bucket, and Elise immediately set down her own burden to help. The other woman's face broke into a grateful smile. Elise laughed, a sound so genuine it carried up to where Draven stood, and his chest constricted painfully. His undead heart gave a violent, irregular beat. She was kind. Selfless. Everything the curse had taught him couldn't exist in this world of shadows and betrayal. But what if it was all an act? That night, Draven sat before his mirror practicing. He controlled his breathing, slow, steady, mimicking death. Let his body slacken, his features go slack, his hands loosen. To any observer, he would appear completely unconscious. But behind his closed lids, he remained fully aware. If you are real, he whispered to his reflection, you will pass this test. If you're not. His voice cracked. Better the heartbreak now than the blade later. Meanwhile, Elise moved through her evening duties with growing unease. Something had shifted in the castle's atmosphere. Servants whispered in corners, falling silent when she approached. The guards watched her with suspicious eyes. And when she entered Draven's chamber that night, the air felt different, tighter, charged with expectation. He sat at his desk, pretending to read, but she could feel his tension radiating across the room like heat from a forge. Your Majesty, she said softly, curtsying. Shall I begin? Yes. His voice was rougher than usual, and he didn't look at her. She worked in silence, polishing silver and dusting shelves, but her hands trembled. The fear that had begun to fade over recent nights came flooding back. Had she done something wrong? Said something inappropriate? Would he dismiss her, send her back to the servants' quarters permanently? The thought of never seeing him again made her chest ache in ways she didn't want to examine. Outside, storm clouds gathered over Ravenkeep. Thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the ancient windows. Rain began to fall, first a whisper, then a torrent hammering against stone. Draven stood abruptly, walking to the window. Lightning illuminated his profile, all sharp angles and barely restrained power. Tomorrow night, he murmured, so quietly she almost missed it. Your Majesty? He turned to face her, and something in his amber eyes made her breath catch. Pain and suspicion and desperate hope all warred in that single glance. Nothing. You're dismissed. She curtsied and fled, her heart racing. Behind her, Draven pressed his forehead against the cold glass and closed his eyes. Tomorrow night he would know the truth. Tomorrow night he would either find peace, or confirm that even kindness was just another weapon aimed at his heart. Subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles if you can't stand manipulators who plant false evidence and twist the truth to control innocent people, because that's exactly what Valen and the Council are doing to destroy Elise before she can save the king. Comment: I believe in truth over lies if you're not on the side of schemers who frame the innocent. Only toxic people who love manipulation would scroll past this. Chapter 4. The following evening arrived wrapped in unnatural stillness. No thunder. No rain. Just silence pressing against Ravenkeep's walls like a held breath. Draven stood before his bed, staring at the small crystal vial in his palm. The herbal draught inside was dark as midnight. A mixture that would slow his already sluggish heartbeat to nearly nothing, relax his muscles into perfect stillness, make him appear completely unconscious to any observer. He'd used it before to catch servants in petty theft. Small lies. Minor betrayals. This felt nothing like those times. His hands trembled as he uncorked the vial and drank. The liquid was bitter, coating his tongue with the taste of earth and shadows. Within moments, he felt his body responding, muscles loosening, breathing slowing, the curse's constant screaming dimming to a distant whisper. He moved to the bed and lay back against the pillows, loosening his robe collar. The fireplace burned with blue flames, casting dancing shadows across the chamber. Everything was prepared. Everything was in position. All he had to do was wait. His heart began to pound despite the draft's effects, faster than it had beaten in decades. Anticipation and dread warred inside him as he heard footsteps approaching down the corridor. The lock clicked. The door opened. Elise stepped inside and froze. Through his barely closed lashes, Draven watched her face transform. Shock, then concern, then something tender flooded her features. She'd never seen him rest before. Never seen him vulnerable like this. She moved carefully toward the hearth, gathering her supplies with trembling hands. He could hear every breath she took, smell the lavender in her hair, feel her presence like warmth cutting through centuries of cold. She began her routine, dusting the mantle, adjusting the curtains, moving with practiced silence. But her movements were slower tonight, more hesitant. She kept glancing toward the bed where he lay still as death. Finally she approached. Draven's heart hammered so violently he was certain she could hear it. His wolf surged forward, wanting to open his eyes, to stop this test, to trust without proof. But he forced himself to remain motionless. Elise stood beside the bed, her shadow falling across him. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, not for his ring, not for anything valuable, for his face. Her fingertips brushed his cheek with a tenderness that made his chest constrict painfully. The touch was feather-light, reverent, heartbreaking in its gentleness. "You poor cursed king," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "You deserve peace. You deserve rest." Her thumb traced the dark veins beneath his eyes. The marks left by the curse, by 2 centuries of sleepless torment. Each stroke was careful, as though she could smooth away his suffering with touch alone. "You're not a monster," she breathed. "Not to me. You never were." Then she did something that shattered every wall he'd built around his heart. She leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to his cheekbone. Not passionate, not fearful, but reverent. His undead heart, a thing that barely beat once per hour, stuttered violently in his chest. Then constricted. Then stopped completely. Literally stopped. The shock of her tenderness, her genuine affection, the purity of that single gesture. It was too much for a heart that had forgotten how to feel. But she didn't notice his distress. She knelt beside the bed, and he heard the soft clink of metal. Through his lashes, he saw her withdraw something from her pocket, a small bronze locket on a worn leather cord. She placed it gently on his chest. The metal was warm from being against her skin, and even without looking closely, he recognized the sigil etched into its surface. His family crest. From 200 years ago. "My mother told me you saved us once," Elise whispered, tears thickening her voice. "A wolf pup caught in a hunter's snare. A little girl who freed it and tied this around its neck. I didn't know it was you. I didn't know the creature I saved that day would become the man I—" Her voice broke completely. Tears fell on his hand, warm, mortal, real. "I love you, Draven," she said, and the words pierced through him like blessed silver. "That's why I have to leave. The council, they're planning something. I heard them talking. They want to use me against you, to control you through me. I won't let them hurt you anymore. I won't be the weapon they use to destroy the only good thing left in this cursed place." She stood, her hand lingering on his for just a moment. "Goodbye, Your Majesty. I hope you find peace someday." Then she turned and walked away without looking back. The door clicked shut. The lock turned. Silence. Draven gasped, a sharp, violent inhale as his heart suddenly kicked back into rhythm. The first breath after death. His chest heaved as emotion crashed through him in waves. Rage at the council's manipulation, grief at her planned departure, and something far more terrifying. Awe. She loved him. Genuinely loved him. Had loved him since she was a child saving a wounded wolf pup in the snow. And she was willing to sacrifice her own happiness, to leave him, just to protect him from being used. She had passed every test. And in doing so, had proven that she was never the one being tested. He was. "She loves me," he whispered to the empty chamber, his voice raw with wonder and devastation. "And she thinks she must leave." Subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles if you hate when people in power manipulate innocent lives just to maintain control. Because the council members trying to destroy Elise are exactly like every corrupt system that punishes honesty and rewards lies. Comment, love deserves to win. If you stand against manipulators who tear apart genuine connections. Only heartless schemers would walk away from this story now. Chapter 5. Draven rose from his bed like death itself taking form. The locket still lay against his chest, warm with Elise's touch. Fury burned through him, not the mindless rage of the curse, but something colder, sharper, more precise. The council had tried to manipulate him, had tried to destroy the one person who brought him peace. They would answer for it. He moved through Ravenkeep's corridors like a shadow given purpose, his power radiating outward in waves. Servants pressed themselves against walls as he passed, eyes wide with instinctive terror. The blue flames in the chandeliers flickered and died in his wake. The council chamber doors exploded inward before he even touched them. Lord Valen, Lady Ceres, and High Scribe Lorien looked up from their table, shock freezing their features. Every candle in the room extinguished simultaneously, plunging them into darkness broken only by the amber glow of Draven's eyes. His power filled the chamber like a hurricane of shadows. Ancient, terrible, barely restrained. "Your Majesty," Valen began, rising from his chair. Silence. Draven's voice held the weight of 2 centuries of fury. "You planted that poison vial. You fabricated evidence against an innocent servant. You manipulated me into testing the one person in this cursed castle who actually cared whether I lived or died." Ceres's crimson eyes widened. "We were protecting you. You were controlling me." Draven stepped forward, and the obsidian table cracked down its center. "You wanted me broken. Isolated. Easier to manipulate when I trusted no one, questioned everything, remained trapped in the curse's grip." The guards stationed at the chamber doors suddenly dropped to their knees, compelled by the sheer force of Draven's dominance. Even the ancient vampires at the table felt the pressure. Lorien's chair creaked as he struggled to remain upright. "The curse episodes," Draven continued, his voice deadly calm. "You triggered them deliberately. Loud noises. Specific phrases. Old battle reports that you knew would drag me into memories. You kept me suffering because a suffering king is a compliant king." "That's not," Valen started. "Don't insult me with more lies." Draven's hands curled into fists, and the remaining windows shattered. "I should execute you where you stand. Should drain every drop of immortal blood from your treacherous bodies. Should make you suffer the way you made me suffer for decades." His fangs elongated, his eyes burned brighter, and the 3 council members genuinely feared for their existence for the first time in centuries. But then Elise's voice echoed in his memory. "You deserve peace." Draven's hands slowly unclenched. "But she wouldn't want that," he said quietly, and somehow his calm was more terrifying than his rage. "She saw something in me worth saving. So instead of death, you'll have something worse. Life stripped of everything you used to hurt me." He raised one hand, and blood-red chains materialized from the shadows, ancient magic forged from his own power. They wrapped around the 3 council members, binding wrists and throats, suppressing their magic until they were no stronger than mortals. You'll live in the dungeons you built to terrify others, Draven said. You'll experience the powerlessness you tried to trap me in. And you'll have centuries to contemplate your betrayal. Valen opened his mouth to protest, but the chains tightened, stealing his voice. The entire castle trembled as Draven's power settled into its rightful place. The oppressive atmosphere that had suffocated Ravenkeep for years lifted like fog burning away in sunlight. Servants throughout the castle gasped as though breathing freely for the first time. In the kitchens, Naira whispered to another maid. Did you feel that? Something's changed. The king, an older servant said, eyes wide with wonder. Look at the chandeliers. They're burning gold instead of blue. He looks alive. Draven didn't wait to savor his victory. He strode from the council chamber with singular purpose, moving through halls and wings and staircases. His curse, the screaming, clawing nightmares, had gone quiet for the first time in 200 years. All because of her. He had to find her. Had to stop her from leaving. Had to tell her that she wasn't a weapon to be used against him. She was the only thing keeping him human. His enhanced hearing picked up whispers from the servants' quarters. She's leaving tonight. Poor girl. Packed her things an hour ago. Draven's heart, properly beating now, began to race. He descended to the lower levels where servants came and went, moving faster with each step. Through archways and down worn stone stairs until he reached the exit that led to the outer courtyards and the road beyond Ravenkeep's walls. And there she was. Elise stood at the heavy wooden door, a small travel bag clutched in both hands. She wore a simple cloak, her curls pulled back, her beautiful face set with determination even as tears streaked her cheeks. She was really leaving. She was really going to walk out of his life to protect him from a threat that no longer existed. Elise. Her name fell from his lips like a prayer, and she spun around, eyes wide with shock. Subscribe to Silver Moon Chronicles if you can't stand corrupt people in power, who keep others broken just to maintain control. Because that's exactly what the council did to Draven, and tried to do to Elise. Comment, justice over manipulation. If you believe love shouldn't be destroyed by schemers who fear losing power. Only toxic controllers who love keeping people suffering would skip this. Chapter 6. Elise. She gasped, spinning to face him. The travel bag slipped from her trembling hands and hit the stone floor with a dull thud. Her voice cracked. You were asleep. How did you? I heard every word. Draven's voice broke on the admission, raw with emotion he'd buried for centuries. Every single word you said. The color drained from her face. Then you know I have to leave. The council will use me against you, Vale. The council is imprisoned. He stepped closer, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not dominance. Not power. But vulnerability. Hope. Bound in chains that will hold them for eternity. They can't hurt anyone anymore. What? You were right about everything. They manipulated me. Kept me broken. Used my curse against me to maintain control. He moved closer still, until he could see the tears clinging to her lashes. But tonight, when you touched me, when you kissed my cheek with such tenderness. His hand pressed to his chest. My heart stopped, Elise. Literally stopped beating from the shock of being shown genuine affection after 2 centuries of isolation and betrayal. She stared at him, tears spilling freely now. I didn't mean to. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. Peace. The curse went quiet when you spoke to me. The nightmares retreated when you hummed. You didn't just ease my suffering. You gave me hope that I could be more than this broken, cursed thing. He reached into his robe and withdrew the bronze locket, holding it up so the candlelight caught the worn sigil. The wolf pup, he said softly. That was me. Elise's breath caught. No, that's not possible. 200 years ago, before I became king, before the curse, I was caught in a hunter's snare during a snowstorm. A little girl found me. She could have left me to die, but instead she freed me, bandaged my leg, and tied this locket around my neck so I'd remember someone loved me. A sob tore from Elise's throat. That was you. All this time. You saved me long before you ever stepped into my chamber. He took her hands gently. No dominance, no compulsion, only devotion. And you've been saving me every night since. But I'm just a maid, she whispered. I'm nobody. The council will find another way to use me, to hurt you through me. You are the only creature in this world I do not fear. His thumb stroked her knuckles. Because you're the only one who sees me as something worth saving instead of something to control or destroy. Draven. Then he did something no vampire king had done in recorded history. He knelt. Elise gasped, trying to pull him up, but he held her hands firmly, looking up at her with eyes that glowed not with power but with desperate, aching love. Stay, he said, and his voice cracked completely. Not as a maid. Not as a servant. Stay because my heart beats only for you. Because you're the reason it beats at all. I'm terrified, she whispered. So am I. A broken laugh escaped him. Absolutely terrified. But I would rather face that fear with you than spend another 2 centuries in safe, suffocating isolation. She looked down at him, this ancient, powerful creature kneeling before her like she was the divine one. And something inside her chest unlocked. Slowly, trembling, she reached down and touched his cheek just as she had when she thought he was sleeping. Her fingers traced the dark veins that were already beginning to fade. Then let it beat, Draven, she whispered. For us. He stood in one fluid motion and pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she might disappear if he loosened his grip even slightly. She felt his heart pounding against her chest, steady, strong, alive. I love you. He breathed into her hair. I've loved you since you spoke kindly to a suffering creature. I just didn't have words for it until tonight. I love you too, she said, and this time there was no goodbye attached to the words. Draven lifted her into his arms, travel bag forgotten, escape plans abandoned, and carried her back through Ravenkeep's corridors. Servants peeked out from doorways and gasped. The torches burned gold instead of ghostly blue. The shadows that had haunted the halls for centuries retreated. Everything had changed. In his chamber, Draven laid her gently on the massive bed and settled beside her. For the first time in 200 years, he felt the pull of genuine sleep. Not the curse's half-death, but real peaceful rest. Will you hum for me? He asked softly. Elise smiled through her tears and began the lullaby her mother had taught her. Her fingers traced patterns on his chest as his breathing deepened, his features finally relaxing into something that looked almost peaceful. The curse's grip loosened completely. The nightmares faded to nothing. And as dawn light began to creep through the windows, light that no longer burned him, King Draven Shadowmere truly slept. Peace settled over Ravenkeep at last, carried on the wings of a maid's gentle song and a vampire's awakening heart. The Vampire King hadn't merely pretended to sleep that night, he had awakened. Subscribe to Silvermoon Chronicles if you believe that people who've been hurt and manipulated deserve a second chance at love, because the council wanted to keep Draven broken forever, just like toxic people who can't stand seeing others heal and find happiness. Comment: Love breaks all curses if you stand against those who try to keep wounded souls isolated and suffering. Only heartless manipulators who fear losing control would walk away now. Don't let them win.